Jomini, alas, is dead, and he was called the Pen of Russia, and the Pen of Russia is laid to rest. A pleasant, genial, witty old man was the Baron, who inherited all of the traditions of Prince Gorchakov and some of his prejudices. In his hospital home on the Moykate, I don't know where that is, it was pleasant to hear him discourse in his sarcastic style about men and things. It was he who said that hanging journalists would be the surest way of giving peace to Europe. And that parliamentarism received its death blow when lawyers were permitted to sit in representative assemblies. Very wise man. But he was full of it. He was always like that. He played a key role in this meeting that Bismarck wanted to call a Congress. And it worked. Ultimately, Gontaubiron, remember the man who wanted to be the key diplomatic figure, really hit it off with Jomini. They got along very well. Different personalities, but they got along very well. And as a result, it was sort of a win for France. They did not agree to let Prussia keep Alsace and Lorraine. They really didn't agree on much of anything, which was usually the case. They denied that the German gains from the war would be in perpetuity, so in fact they fell down on the side of France. The gains were not forever. And during this whole event, Gorchakov, again, the ego, the man who could read Horace in the original, becomes more and more suspicious of Bismarck. So, just when you think you got a maid in the shade, your general of the flow, a new issue arises. There's always a new issue in foreign affairs. Remember Gambetta, the radical? Suddenly, things are going too smoothly, and of course, radicals and revolutionaries don't quit. They don't stop and say, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong. He resurfaces and goes on another balloon trip and a railroad trip, barnstorming through the lost provinces. And he's rabble-rousing against the Germans. And he even went so far, and this is what probably aroused the interest, of saying it was time for a new social stratum to rule in France. And to talk about the wrong thing to say in the eyes of the rest of Europe, who's trying to maintain the old order. It was time for a new social stratum to rule France. And at one point he broke down and cried on stage over the loss of Alsace and Lorraine. Probably sincere, but he was seen as the bête noire, the black beast of revolutionary Europe. So, oh no, not Europe. He comes back at this time, just when things are starting to move pretty well. The president of France was Thiers. I mentioned him last week. He was president of France, no, prime minister rather, different title, different years, different title. Prime minister of France during the reign of Louis Philippe. Remember the bourgeois monarch whose version was get rich, and richissez-vous, make yourself rich? He's the one who masterminded the first French resurgence before Napoleon III had the coup. Well, he's still around. Remember last week I said Louis Philippe in the cartoons that I had was always pictured as a pear because he had a pear-shaped body, so the cartoonists called him a pear. Well, him, they called the owl. All the cartoons would always put him, because he always had his glasses on, and he sometimes had big glasses, so they would picture him as an owl. But he was a very smooth operator, and very smart, very good leader. He saw the handwriting on the wall. He saw the danger from the revolution in France, as perceived in the eyes of Europe. He also didn't want the revolution. He's trying to maintain, he's back in power in 1871, after being out of power for a long time. He decides to appoint conservatives to the cabinet. Logical move. And there were not everybody was a monarchist or a revolutionary. There were conservative conservative democratic people. We called them Republicans. Not to confuse with American history. I mean, it's just a different name. But they were conservatives. They were central. They were liberals. They were radicals. It was the same as any parliamentary structure in Europe then and now. He starts approving conservatives to power, and that gains trust. People begin to trust France. He wins many commercial treaties. Again, he was a businessman. Significant commercial treaties, which helped allow France to repay the billions in reparations that they had to pay. So he was a great person. During this period, this character is not significant, Timoshev was the Russian Minister of the Interior, not a diplomat, so he's a Minister of the Interior in Russia. He visits France, and he warns Thiers, you got to stop the revolutionary talk, because we don't need this in Russia either. We don't need this anywhere. And it was written up in all the papers. It was a big statement to be made by France. But that was fine. That supported his efforts. people begin to see that maybe it's wise for us to rebuild the country in a way that's trusted by the rest of Europe. So he did. So France has an economic miracle. This is not just a slide. This is a contemporary slide. I just love it. Constitutional debates are going on in France. Do we have universal decryption? How do we define the Constitution? Do we have a levée en masse? Do we have all these debates are going on. 1872, the year ago we were just talking about, when the emperors are visiting in Russia and Berlin, the military reviews are going on. France has one of the most favorable years in its growth in their history. Revenue, 700 million francs. Remember they owed 500 million? They brought in 700 million, and they were able in 1 year to set aside 200 million they could invest in. So in 1 year they paid off what looked like an insurmountable amount of money. In 1 year they paid it back to Russia. You know, for good work they're going to get the pressure on the spot. So the pressure continues to build a more conservative regime. Makes sense, this is working. This needs to be working. They have an economic miracle. Finally, perfidious Albion, what they call it, emerged. Where have they been? They haven't really been involved very much in this scene. Not just because they're across the pond and across the channel. They have other interests. British interests or the empire, which does include Constantinople as an influence in Egypt and East. They're not really involved in these affairs in a great way yet. But now it's time, because Thiers wins a big commercial treaty with the British.